When I talk to attorneys, accessibility professionals, clients, and other people in this space, what I've noticed is there's usually some area of accessibility and compliance that they're unfamiliar with or that they're slightly uncomfortable with. And I think the reason for this is there's just so much involved. And there are so many different terms to work through. And it's not just understanding what the terms mean, it's understanding how the different aspects of accessibility and compliance relate to one another. So, what I've done is I've created the diagram that's currently on the screen with me. And this diagram isn't complex, but it does have a lot of parts. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through these different blocks of text that are on the screen with me. And I'm going to help you understand how to relate these different terms and concepts to one another. And by the way, I will include a description of this diagram in the YouTube description for this video. I will also include a link. It will be accessible.org/map. I will include that link and it will have a PDF of this diagram again along with the description. But for now, let's work through the center of this diagram, starting with digital assets. So I have digital assets bucketed into three categories. It's represented by three blocks, and we have web and mobile apps, websites, and software. So obviously, digital assets can expand beyond these three groupings. But here, I just want to zoom out, and we're not looking at anything overly specific, but we're trying to get a broad, holistic view of what's going on with digital accessibility and compliance. So here our focus is going to be on these three blocks: web and mobile apps, websites, and software. These are the digital assets that we need to make accessible. All right, so flowing down through the chart, and we're looking directly in the center, we now have legal compliance. And with legal compliance, what's the way to think of this as it's typically going to be WCAG plus the additional requirements. So these might be supplemental requirements, these might be administrative requirements, but the material portion of legal compliance is going to usually come down to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, sometimes WCAG won't be outright incorporated into the law or adopted by the law, but you'll usually see a strong overlap with technical accessibility standards for digital assets and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So to keep things simple, just remember WCAG is the material portion of compliance, and then we have the other additional requirements that will come up. And so usually it'll be supplemental or administrative requirements. So that's the legal compliance side of digital accessibility. And again, we will come back to this block because we have we have a block on each side of legal compliance. We'll come back to this in a moment, but for now, we're just going to continue flowing down the center of this diagram. And the next block is WCAG conformance. So WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And what's important to remember are these are technical standards for web accessibility. So with this, usually we see these standards either outright implemented or adopted into the law, or they will be referenced. So WCAG is never the law itself. It might be incorporated into the law, but it's its own separate entity. They're the technical standards. So they're the technical side of accessibility. And there are three different versions that are relevant to us. And it's going to be 2.0 and conformance level AA, 2.1, and then 2.2, all conformance level AA. Now, in some circumstances, AAA conformance may be relevant, but for most people, it's only going to be AA conformance. So with 2.0, just think of this as having 38 different requirements. 2.1 just adds on top of those 38 to make it 50 requirements. And then 2.2 is just going to add a few more success criteria. So the total will be 55 requirements. And when I say requirements, think of these as things to do or things to account for accessibility. And the technical term for these different requirements is success criteria. So 2.0 level AA has 38 success criteria or requirements. So that's what we're working towards. We're working towards full WCAG conformance. Now, just because our digital asset isn't fully WCAG conformant. It doesn't mean it's inaccessible, but optimally, we are striving for full WCAG conformance. So flowing on down the chart, how do we do this? Well, I have three different blocks. We have an audit, remediation, and user testing. So with what's important to remember about an audit is this is a formal evaluation where we are going to find and report on accessibility issues. And what's going to result in an accessibility issue? Well, any instance of nonconformance with a given version and conformance level of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So essentially, we are grading the digital asset against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So the most commonly used version and conformance level is 2.1 AA. So we will conduct an audit and under WCAG 2.1 AA and then return any instances of nonconformance in the audit report. And so that's what will go to the client so they know exactly what accessibility issues they need to fix. Now, after an audit is remediation, and that is where we fix the issues. So with remediation, we need to pay attention to the code and the content, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And then we also have user testing. Now, user testing isn't absolutely necessary, but it is a really nice option, and I recommend it if at all possible because user testing gives us a person with a disability's practical experience, and it really serves as a nice filtration system to ensure that all of the issues that have been reported in the audit are indeed fixed. So we'll come back to that in a moment, but now we're going to continue flowing down from these three blocks. And so looking at the audit block, we next have methodologies. So this is important because it tells us what type of work goes into the audit. So how are the accessibility issues being found that are being reported on? Well, there are a number of methodologies that are used during an audit. One is screen reader testing, another is keyboard testing. Then we have visual inspection, a code inspection, and then optionally an automated scan. So usually a scan is a part of the audit, but you're never going to rely upon an automated scan because we want to actually check to make sure, we want a technical accessibility expert making sure that all of the issues that are reported on are accurate and correct. But these are the different methodologies that go into an audit. So we're trying to find optimally, we will find all of the accessibility issues that exist on a digital asset. So let's just use the example of a website. We're going to use all of these methodologies to uncover accessibility issues and report on them. And then again, once we report, then we start to fix. This is where we have remediation take place. And then so looking at the diagram, we have two different blocks flowing from remediation. And these blocks are code and content. So with code, this is the technical aspect of accessibility where we need to have someone with a web development background who is making sure that the fixes are in place. And so what types of technologies do you need to be aware of? Well, you need to be aware of ARIA. So this is accessible rich internet applications. You need to be aware of JavaScript. You need to have experience in JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. CSS stands for cascading style sheets, and this gets at design. So we want to make sure that the person who is remediating has this web development background or just the development background in general, so that they are able to make the necessary fixes and they have the requisite experience and expertise to implement these changes. Now, accessibility isn't something that comes with a development background. So it really is a specialized subset of knowledge. So ideally, the developer who is working on our digital asset is going to have a knowledge in accessibility, but this is not always the case. And so that is why the audit is so important, because usually the audit can help instruct on how to fix the issues so that the developer knows they have guidance on how exactly to make these fixes. So there will be examples of model code and suggestions and possibly other notes or tips on how to make the fix. But this is the code aspect of accessibility. This is the technical aspect of accessibility. And then we move to content. So we not only have to make sure that the code is edited correctly, we also need to make sure that we have accessible content. So when I say content, this includes images, text, video, audio, and then possibly documents. So documents could be included as a digital asset, but here I have them filed under content. The important part here is there are really two aspects of remediation, and that is the code aspect, so the technically advanced aspect, and then the content aspect. So content usually isn't overly technical. It's not too difficult, but it is something where it can take a long time. But these are the two really the two only parts of remediation. So we need to make sure our code and our content are accessible. And then last, looking at user testing. Again, we want to save user testing for last. So we have an audit, remediation, and then almost always you're going to have a re-audit where you're going to look at all of the fixes that were made and ensure they were made correctly. And so that process can continue on until there are no accessibility issues that the auditor is finding outstanding. But then you can optionally add in user testing. And so this isn't absolutely necessary, but it is a nice addition because it acts as a filtration system to ensure that someone with a disability who is typically using assistive technology is not coming across any accessibility issues in their experience. So this is a practical filter. That's what I have flowing under user testing. This is a practical filter where someone is just going in and testing the website. So they're quite literally testing the website. And again, this is going to be a professional with one or more disabilities, and they are typically going to be using assistive technology. So in almost all user testing cases, it's going to be someone who is blind or visually impaired, and they're going to be using screen reader assistive technology. Now, this doesn't always have to be the case, but I'm just telling you in the marketplace, this is usually the case when it comes to who is conducting the user testing. Well, okay. So we've got the center of this diagram down, and now we're going to move to the left, my left of the diagram, and we have the digital assets, but the digital assets, the web and mobile apps, the websites, and the software, those three blocks, they flow into legal compliance, and from legal compliance, on my left side, we have organizational policy compliance. So that's what we're now going to focus in on. This is where we're looking at. It could be the company, it could be a government entity, it could be any type of, it's typically a larger organization. It doesn't have to be, but it typically is. And so this is where the organization sets out their policy on accessibility. And the policy is usually guided by a law that the organization seeks to be in compliance with. So with the organization policy compliance, this is where we are attempting to comply with our own internal requirements and mandates. So the centralized hub of everything is going to be your accessibility policy. And this is where I have flowing underneath accessibility policy. We are contemplating the roles and responsibilities. So who is in charge of what? And then we have procurement, and then we have training. And of course, the policy can include many other sections. But these are the three that I wanted to include in this diagram because they are three pillars of an accessibility policy. And when it comes to procurement, we have flowing underneath that a VPAT and an ACR. So with procurement, here we have our organization seeking out other products and services that we are going to use internally to help our operations operate in whatever aspect that may be. But when we are procuring products and services, we want to ensure that those products and services are accessible so that we're not working against our own efforts by introducing third-party, let's say, software that is inaccessible. So here with procurement, this is where our procurement agents might start requesting or demanding what is technically an ACR from the vendors or the sellers that we are buying from. So with a VPAT and ACR, what's important to keep in mind is that a VPAT stands for a voluntary product accessibility template. It is literally just that, is literally just a template. So that's what VPAT technically stands for. It's just the documentation that you can download right now off the ITIC website. And ACR is when that template is completed, when the details are added to the template, and then the material accessibility portion is also completed. That's going to result in an ACR. So that's what we're really after. but the two terms are used interchangeably in the marketplace. And actually, VPAT is used more than ACR, but it's just important to know those differences when you are working, when you need an ACR, or when someone requests a VPAT. You just need to know what those two different terms mean, and that these are very related and used interchangeably. But it's the ACR that we want. So remember, the ACR is the completed VPAT. All right, and then so flowing from this, from the VPAT ACR block, we last have accessibility statement, and the accessibility statement is really like a distillation of our accessibility policy. So it's going to carry forward our policy and all of the information that is publicly relevant. So this is where our audience, let's say it's our website, the visitors to our website can find out what we say about accessibility and what our current status is on accessibility, whatever the case may be. It can also where you can receive assistance on accessibility and you can get feedback on accessibility. Accessibility statements don't have to be in one set, they don't have to be written one set way, but there are usually some staples to an accessibility statement that are going to be included, and that is going to include a method for at least one method for feedback and one method to receive assistance if someone should need it. But of course, accessibility statements can include many more things, including different aspects. Maybe it might be the web content accessibility guidelines and that you seek to be in conformance with. It might be that you have a conformance statement and you include that. It can include so many different things, but that is where the accessibility statement comes into play. It really is the public facing. It is the relevant information that goes to the public, and it carries forward your accessibility policy. But it's not going to include things like who is responsible for procurement and what your procurement policy is when it comes to accessibility, etc. All right, so that completes the left side of the diagram for me. We're now going to move to the right side of the diagram. And so we have here software as a digital asset, but again, that is not connected. What is connected is we move down to legal compliance from the center, and now we're going to go right to laws, regulations, and then I have and lawsuits. Now, what's important to remember here is that in the United States, there is serial litigation that is ongoing that targets website owners. And so website owners are being sued for website accessibility. So that I consider that like separate from the laws and the regulations, because when you're seeking to be compliant with laws and regulations, that really is different than avoiding or significantly reducing your risk of lawsuits. But the reason I have this group together is, again, we want to keep this simple, but just be aware that I don't put lawsuits in they're really like a separate category, but I've just grouped them together here with laws and regulations. But again, we are seeking compliance, right? So what are these different laws and regulations? Well, I have 3 blocks here, and obviously this goes well beyond these 3 blocks, but I have Section 508. And then I have ADA, that stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then I have the EAA, which stands for the European Accessibility Act. Again, I could have added many more laws and regulations here, but I just stopped here for the sake of simplicity. Under the ADA, we flow down to Title I, Title II, and Title III. So just quickly, Title I pertains to employment. Title II deals with state and local governments and their instrumentalities. And then we have Title III, which applies to places of public accommodation. So just think of Title III as applying to most of the private businesses and companies that you're aware of. Title II deals with the government and the public entities. And then Title I is going to apply to, think of companies with 15 or more employees. Then they need to make sure that they're providing accessibility for their employees, and that's what Title I pertains to. But of course, I could have included so many different laws here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the laws and regulation side. And so with Title II, obviously there was a recent update to Title II, so we saw a new rule for digital accessibility with Title II. But then here we have flowing down from the laws and flowing down from the ADA and its different titles, Then we have conformance statement and certification. So this is the last block in this diagram. And this is getting at a very common request where people are seeking out certification of digital accessibility because they want to have conclusively made it so that their website is certified accessible. That's what inevitably what people are ultimately what people want, which is definitely understandable. And so here we have a conformance statement. A conformance statement is a construct of the W3C. So that means whatever provider you're working with, if they issue a conformance statement, they need to follow the rules that the W3C's WAI, their Web Accessibility Initiative, have set out to create the conformance statement. So again, it's a construct of the W3C, and you are bound by their rules for issuing a conformance statement. So one important rule is that a conformance statement can only be issued if the entire scope is for the conformance statement is fully conformant with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And then with certification, this is provider certification. Now, if the certification is going to be, it's going to carry any weight, again, it's going to also overlap with the conformance statement in that it's going to require full conformance. So certification needs to be definitive. It needs to define the scope. It needs to set the date. And if there are any changes made to the digital asset after issuance of the conformance statement or the certification, which again, significantly overlap, if there is any change, then those documents are going to lose their freshness. But it's not to say that they still aren't compelling and they still don't carry significant weight, but it's just important to keep in mind that digital assets are dynamic. So once changes are made, then obviously there won't be an instant certification of those changes. So just keeping that in mind. And then flowing down from this conformance statement and certification block, we have the certified accessible seal from accessible.org. And I've added this because this presentation is made by accessible.org and myself. So I've added here the accessible.org logo, as well as copyright Kris Rivenberg and accessible.org 2024 on the diagram. But this is the entire diagram. And I think as I've gone through this, you should have a better feel for these different terms and what they mean and how they relate to one another and what's going on. Because I think so many people, they're working with all of these jumbled of terms and they're not quite sure how everything fits together. So I think this is going to be really helpful. I'm going to include a description of this diagram in the description for this YouTube video. I'll also include a link, and then I will add other resources, including links to accessible.org and our services. So that will all be included in the description.